The human brain is constantly engaged in interpreting signals from the external world and transforming them into perceptions, emotions, and behaviors. Among the most ancient and primal of these sensory systems are smell and taste. While they often seem secondary in our day-to-day lives, their influence on behavior is profound, both in conscious and unconscious domains. Understanding how smell, taste, and pheromones operate allows us to better appreciate not just why we respond the way we do to food, environments, and other people, but also how evolution has fine-tuned our sensory systems to shape our survival, choices, and social dynamics. The sense of smell olfaction is one of the most direct sensory pathways to the brain. Unlike vision or hearing, which are processed through complex relay stations like the thalamus, smell has a fast track directly to the limbic system, including the amygdala and hippocampus. This direct connection is the reason why smells can evoke vivid emotional memories and trigger powerful behavioral responses. If you've ever walked into a room and smelled something that transported you back to childhood, that's not imagination. That's the olfactory system's deep integration with memory and emotion at work. Olfactory receptors, located in the nasal cavity, are specialized neurons that detect volatile chemicals in the air. These neurons send their axons to the olfactory bulb, which then projects to various brain regions including the piriform cortex, entorhinal cortex, and again, the amygdala and hippocampus. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Smell helped our ancestors locate food, avoid predators, detect fire, and identify kin and potential mates. The speed and directness of this pathway reflect the survival priority that olfaction represented. Now taste or gustation interacts with smell in meaningful ways. While we often perceive them as separate senses, the majority of what we describe as taste is actually flavor, which is a multisensory integration of taste, smell, and even somatosensory inputs like texture and temperature. Taste receptors on the tongue can detect 5 primary modalities: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Each of these has a biological relevance. Sweet and umami often signal calorie-rich or protein-rich foods. Salt is essential for fluid balance and nerve function. Bitter can indicate potential toxins, and sour reflects acidity, which can be both beneficial and harmful depending on the context. These taste signals are relayed to the brainstem and ultimately to areas of the cortex like the insula and orbitofrontal cortex. But here's the key point. The perception of taste is tightly linked to both reward and aversion circuits in the brain. Dopaminergic pathways, especially those involving the nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area, respond robustly to palatable tastes, especially when those tastes are linked with caloric intake. This is one reason we can become conditioned to crave sugary or fatty foods. There's a learning component. Once the brain associates a specific taste with a caloric or nutrient reward, it tags that taste as desirable, and future exposure can trigger powerful motivational states. Smell and taste don't just influence individual behavior in isolation. They are foundational to social interaction as well. This is where pheromones come into play. Pheromones are chemical signals released by an individual that trigger specific behavioral or physiological responses in others of the same species. In humans, the existence and role of pheromones have been debated, but there's growing evidence that certain volatile compounds can influence human behavior and physiology in subtle yet significant ways. Unlike traditional smells, pheromonal detection is believed to occur through a specialized system called the vomeronasal organ VNO, although its functionality in adult humans is still under scientific investigation. Even if the VNO is vestigial or non-functional in humans, other olfactory pathways might compensate. Studies have shown that exposure to certain human-derived compounds, like androstenedione found in male sweat, can modulate mood, sexual arousal, and even hormone levels in females, often without conscious awareness. Similarly, exposure to female pheromones has been linked to increased testosterone levels in males. One particularly fascinating area of research involves the synchronization of menstrual cycles among women who live in close proximity. While not universally accepted, Some studies suggest that exposure to other women's pheromones can influence the timing of ovulation. This could have deep evolutionary roots, possibly related to reducing reproductive competition or increasing communal child care success. Additionally, smell is essential for maternal bonding. Newborns can recognize their mother's scent within days of birth, and mothers can often identify their baby by scent alone. This bidirectional recognition fosters bonding and can influence behaviors like nursing and soothing. It's not just humans. Rodents, for instance, rely heavily on olfactory cues to identify their young, find mates, and even detect stress or disease in other individuals. Smell can also be a social signal of health. Research has found that people can detect illness through body odor, and that individuals in better physical condition are often perceived as having more pleasant natural scents. In studies where participants were asked to rate the attractiveness of tiche, shirts worn by strangers, preferences correlated with immune system genes, particularly those related to the major histocompatibility complex MHC. People are often attracted to others with dissimilar MHC genes, possibly because this enhances offspring immunity. Furthermore, smell and taste influence behavior in non-conscious ways through associative learning. A person who eats a particular food during a stressful event may develop an aversion to that food, even if the food itself wasn't the cause of the discomfort. Conversely, eating a comfort food during a positive experience can create long-lasting cravings for that food in future emotional states. This is how taste and smell can become conditioned stimuli, triggering behavior long after the original event has passed. Environmental odors can modulate behavior more broadly as well. Pleasant ambient smells can increase prosocial behavior, such as helping others or making more generous decisions. Conversely, unpleasant or chemical odors can trigger avoidance, anxiety, or even aggressive responses. These effects are thought to occur via both cortical and subcortical pathways, with the amygdala playing a key role in mediating emotional responses to odors. One of the most interesting aspects of olfaction is that it exhibits a high degree of neuroplasticity. The olfactory bulb is one of the few brain regions that continues to generate new neurons throughout life. This neurogenesis is influenced by exposure to new smells, changes in diet, and even social interactions. Damage to the olfactory system, such as through viral infections or neurodegenerative diseases, can result in anosmia, a loss of smell, which is often accompanied by emotional disturbances like depression and anxiety. This highlights how deeply integrated the olfactory system is with emotional regulation. From a mechanistic standpoint, it's worth noting that the molecular detection of odors and tastes involves specific receptor proteins. Each olfactory neuron expresses one type of receptor, and humans have about 400 functional olfactory receptor genes, each capable of binding to multiple odorants. This combinatorial coding allows for the discrimination of over 1 trillion different odors. Similarly, taste buds contain multiple types of taste receptor cells that use G-protein, coupled receptors and ion channels to transduce chemical signals into electrical ones. The interaction of these systems with neuromodulators like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin further shapes behavior. For example, the act of tasting something sweet increases dopamine release in the brain's reward pathways. Smelling a loved one's scent can increase oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone. These neurochemical shifts don't just affect our mood in the moment, they influence our future behavior, memory consolidation, and decision-making processes. Finally, it's important to consider how cultural and individual differences modulate these effects. Genetic polymorphisms can make certain smells or tastes more or less intense for different people. Cultural upbringing also affects how we interpret and respond to sensory input. A fermented dish might be delicious to someone from one culture and repulsive to someone from another. However, with repeated exposure, these perceptions can shift, a process known as sensory adaptation. In summary, the systems of smell, taste, and pheromonal communication are not mere accessories to vision and hearing. They are foundational, evolutionarily ancient drivers of behavior. They operate in both conscious and subconscious domains, influencing how we choose our food, form social bonds, detect danger, and even select our mates. These systems are deeply embedded in our neurobiology and reflect the constant interplay between our internal physiological states and the external world. As we continue to learn more about these systems, we uncover deeper insights into not only what we perceive, but also why we act the way we do. The influence of smell, taste, and pheromones extends far beyond their initial point of entry into our sensory systems. These chemical senses are deeply embedded in the brain's architecture, influencing behavior at a level that is often invisible to our conscious awareness. But to truly understand the scope of their impact, we have to consider how these systems integrate with broader networks that govern arousal, motivation, and decision-making. Consider the brain's hypothalamus, a region that plays a critical role in maintaining homeostasis. Things like hunger, thirst, sexual desire, and circadian rhythms. The hypothalamus receives input from olfactory and gustatory pathways, allowing it to rapidly adjust hormonal output in response to environmental cues. For example, the mere smell of food can trigger the release of ghrelin, a hormone that stimulates appetite, even if caloric needs have already been met. This anticipatory response reflects how smell acts as a predictive cue, preparing the body for what's about to happen rather than just reacting to what has already occurred. This predictive quality is also evident in the dopamine system. When an odor consistently precedes a rewarding experience, like eating something high in calories or encountering a romantic partner, it becomes a conditioned stimulus. Over time, the dopamine neurons shift their activity from the reward itself to the cue predicting it. This is central to how habits form and how cravings develop. Once a sensory cue becomes associated with reward, it can trigger behavior even in the absence of the original stimulus. That's why the scent of popcorn at a movie theater can make you feel hungry, even if you just ate. The gustatory system also interacts with the reward network, but in a slightly different way. While the olfactory system tends to operate more through prediction and memory, taste is often more immediate and evaluative. When a taste signal reaches the brain, it is rapidly integrated with internal state information. Are you nutrient deprived? Are you full? Are you in a state of stress? All of this changes how the brain responds to a given taste. For instance, the taste of salt is especially pleasurable when sodium levels in the body are low, but can be unpleasant when those levels are already sufficient. This dynamic modulation reflects a core principle in neuroscience. Perception is not just about external stimuli, but about internal context. This principle becomes even more interesting when applied to social and sexual behaviors influenced by pheromones and olfactory cues. Many animals rely on pheromones to identify the reproductive status of potential mates. In some species, females release pheromones only when ovulating, signaling fertility to males. While humans are more complex and less overtly tied to reproductive cycles in this way, studies have shown that men rate women's natural scent as more pleasant during the fertile window of the menstrual cycle. These responses are not taught. They emerge from evolutionarily conserved circuits that bias behavior toward reproductive success. There's also compelling research suggesting that women's preferences for male body odor change depending on where they are in their cycle. During ovulation, there is a subtle but measurable shift toward preferring the scent of men with higher testosterone levels or genetically dissimilar immune system profiles. These findings suggest that olfactory cues continue to play a role in mate selection, even in modern humans where those cues are often masked by perfumes and hygiene practices. Another fascinating aspect of these chemical senses is their ability to convey emotional states. Stress, fear, and anxiety all produce subtle changes in body chemistry that can be detected by others through scent. Experiments have shown that people can distinguish between sweat samples collected from individuals who were calm versus those who were experiencing fear or anxiety. What's more, exposure to the fear sweat can activate the amygdala and increase vigilance in the observer, even if they aren't consciously aware of what they smelled. This unconscious communication may have evolved to coordinate group behavior in response to threats, a kind of chemical language that operates below the level of verbal communication. Children and infants also demonstrate an acute sensitivity to olfactory and gustatory cues. Breastfed infants show a preference for the scent of their own mother's milk over others, and newborns can orient toward the smell of their mother's skin within hours after birth. This isn't merely about comfort. It's a hardwired mechanism for ensuring survival, as attachment behaviors are strengthened through these sensory experiences. In turn, mothers often report a deep emotional response to their baby's scent, which can help reinforce caregiving behavior and emotional bonding. Oxytocin release is heightened during these interactions, further deepening the attachment loop. Interestingly, as people age, there is a decline in olfactory and gustatory sensitivity. This sensory degradation is not just an inconvenience. It can have real behavioral consequences. A reduced ability to smell or taste can lead to changes in eating behavior, reduced appetite, and even social withdrawal. In neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, one of the earliest symptoms is often a diminished sense of smell. This loss may not only reflect disease progression, but may actually contribute to further cognitive decline by reducing sensory input that supports emotional and social engagement. When we examine cultural practices around food, scent, and social rituals, we find a mirror of these neurobiological principles. Spices, fragrances, and culinary traditions often evolve in ways that maximize the interplay between smell, taste, and emotion. Cultural norms also influence how individuals interpret sensory experiences. In some cultures, natural body odor is considered an important aspect of sexual attraction. In others, it is masked and sanitized. Yet the underlying biology doesn't change, only the interpretation and context do. This again emphasizes that behavior is shaped by both the hardwiring of the brain and the environment in which it operates. From a therapeutic standpoint, the power of smell and taste is being harnessed in novel ways. Aromatherapy, while sometimes dismissed as pseudoscience, has shown measurable effects on mood, memory, and even immune function when specific compounds are used under controlled conditions. Essential oils like lavender or peppermint can influence brain activity, modulate cortisol levels, and even enhance cognitive performance in certain tasks. While the mechanisms are still being explored, it appears that these substances interact with limbic regions that govern mood and attention, possibly offering non-invasive pathways to emotional regulation. Taste is also being explored in clinical settings to alter behavior, particularly around eating and addiction. One area of research involves manipulating the taste profiles of food to reduce overconsumption. Since hyperpalatable foods can hijack the brain's reward system, modifying flavor intensity or sensory contrast might help recalibrate eating behavior. Some interventions aim to disrupt the learned associations between certain tastes and rewards, potentially offering new tools for managing obesity or compulsive eating. Olfactory training has also emerged as a technique to recover smell after injury or illness. This involves repeated exposure to specific scents over time, which appears to enhance neuroplasticity in the olfactory system. The brain's capacity to rewire in response to sensory input is particularly robust in the olfactory pathway, and such interventions highlight how behavior and brain structure can be mutually reinforcing. Moreover, olfaction and gustation are increasingly being studied in the context of psychological disorders. For example, individuals with depression often show altered sensitivity to taste and smell, with some reporting a loss of pleasure in eating or a blunting of odor perception. This phenomenon, known as anhedonia, reflects a breakdown in the reward circuitry that normally links sensory input to emotional output. By targeting these systems through diet, sensory enrichment, or pharmacological agents, it may be possible to modulate affective states in new ways. Social behavior is another domain where these sensory systems exert strong influence. In group settings, shared meals are often used to build cohesion. The combination of taste, smell, and social interaction activates overlapping neural pathways involved in trust, reward, and memory. Even the act of sharing food can increase oxytocin levels, enhance empathy, and create stronger social bonds. This neurochemical synchrony may be one reason why communal eating is so deeply embedded in human culture. Scent is also used to establish identity. Personal grooming, fragrance choice, and even natural body odor all contribute to the unique chemical signature each person carries. These olfactory fingerprints can influence how others perceive our confidence, trustworthiness, or compatibility. There's emerging evidence that people can subconsciously detect immune compatibility, health status, and emotional state through scent, even if they can't articulate why they feel more drawn to one person over another. All of these observations underscore a fundamental truth about human behavior. We are chemical beings as much as we are cognitive ones. Our thoughts, emotions, and actions are continuously shaped by the sensory input that flows through our body and brain. Smell, taste, and pheromones are not relics of an earlier evolutionary era. They are active participants in the moment-to-moment orchestration of human life. They direct our hunger, our desires, our fears, and our social connections in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. And as research continues to reveal the complexity and depth of these systems, we will no doubt discover even more ways in which the chemical senses shape who we are and how we behave. In conclusion, the senses of smell, taste, and pheromones are far more than simple detectors of our environment. They are dynamic, powerful systems that interface directly with the deepest layers of the brain, influencing our physiology, our emotions, our decisions, and our relationships. They operate both above and below the threshold of conscious awareness, guiding behavior through tightly integrated neural circuits that evolve to ensure survival, reproduction, and social cohesion. These sensory pathways tap into reward, memory, and emotional networks, shaping everything from our food preferences to whom we feel drawn to and how we bond with others. As science continues to uncover the intricacies of these systems, we gain not only a better understanding of human behavior, but also potential tools to enhance well-being, treat disorders, and improve connection, both within ourselves and with one another.